Good afternoon. The first item of business this afternoon is portfolio questions, and the portfolio this afternoon is net zero and energy and transport. Again, I would always call for succinct questions and answers to get in as many members as possible. Question number 1 has been withdrawn. I turn there to question number 2, and I call Sharon Dowie, who is joining us remotely. Ms Dowie.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what steps it is taking to improve public transport connectivity in South West Scotland.
Cabinet Secretary Fiona Hislop.
We continue to work with local authorities in the south west of Scotland regarding the powers of partnership working, franchising and to run their own bus services. Also, the new Bus Infrastructure Fund provides local authorities the opportunity to improve the connectivity of buses, making it more attractive to passengers. We are investing more than £1 billion in rail infrastructure and its maintenance. Examples of recent investment in the region include the £1.9 million upgrade of the Stranraer line. That involved replacing more than 1 kilometre track at Lagan Sarach Viaduct near Girvan and the provision of step-free access at Dumfries Station.
Sharon Dowie.
Thank you. While I welcome any steps to improve public transport in the South West, the reality for many communities in rural Ayrshire is that options remain severely limited. I recently joined the Cumnock and Mauchline Railway Stations Action Group to back their campaign to reopen both stations, closed in 1965, and I saw firsthand the strength of community support. I appreciate the Cabinet Secretary wrote to make just this morning, pointing out a Scottish Government study in 2022 did not back these plans and that there's no money in this year's budget for them. With that in mind, can I ask the Cabinet Secretary if she believes this campaign has any chance of succeeding next year or beyond?
Cabinet Secretary.
So the constituency member, Lena Whittam, and other campaigners have contacted me. I welcome the campaigners' enthusiasm in supporting how transport interventions could bring benefits to the Mauchline area. New local rail proposals are considered subject to a strong business case being developed with a clear alignment to Scottish Government's priorities and the affordabilities of such proposals set out. Now, I note the evidence to date provided is not in line with Transport Scotland's published guidance, such that a transport appraisal using the Scottish Transport Appraisal Guidance STAG is still to be undertaken, and that's required in order to inform a robust strategic business case for transport projects. So my officials have recently written to the campaigners noting the points suggested and suggested that, as other campaigners have done, they discuss their proposals with their local council or a Strathclyde Partnership for Transport as their local regional transport partnership about how to take those necessary appraisals forward. And can I just say the study she referred to was the strategic transport plan for the whole of Scotland. It wasn't just a study on one thing, it was for the whole of Scotland.
Supplementary, Emma Harper.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Transport connectivity is really important for people in the south west of Scotland. Can the Cabinet Secretary inform the Chamber of how many free bus journeys have been made to date by young people in the south west of Scotland as a result of the action of the SNP government?
Cabinet Secretary.
So the Scottish Government's launch of the Young Persons Free Bus Travel Scheme is most definitely an improvement in improving connectivity, particularly for young people. And there have been 3 million journeys made in Dumfries and Galloway for the Young Persons Free Bus Travel Scheme, 3.1 million in South Ayrshire and 5.4 million in East Ayrshire as of the 30th of April 2025. So journeys referred to smart journeys recorded, and they're based on the local authority in which the card was issued. Therefore, some journeys will have been undertaken out with the local authority areas, and figures are subject to change due to late data being received. But that's a brilliant result for young people. It's making those connections more affordable and hopefully, again, helping develop positive travel patterns for young people going forward.
Question number 3, Elena Whittam.
To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on the measures that it is taking to support households to reduce emissions and energy costs.
Minister Alan Strachan.
We have committed to investing over £300 million in our Heat and Buildings programme in 2025-26. This funding will be spent on reducing emissions from heating and improving energy efficiency in homes and other buildings across Scotland, as well as developing heat networks. We will continue our successful Warmer Homes Scotland and area-based schemes aimed at people in fuel poverty, as well as our generous Home Energy Scotland advice, grants and loans and funding for social homes. Households wanting to take action should contact Home Energy Scotland, who can help those interested to navigate the support available.
Elena Whittam.
I thank the Minister for that answer. The Minister will be aware that large rural areas of Scotland, such as my constituency of Carrickmillock and Doon Valley, have unique challenges which can make decarbonisation financially prohibitive for many homeowners, be that due to the age and fabric of their home or being positioned in a conservation area where the options such as solar panels have been disallowed. Therefore, does the Minister agree with me that citizens who live in such homes must be supported to find a balance between reaching net zero and reducing fuel poverty? And can the Scottish Government assist them in that?
Minister.
Well, the balance that the member mentions is crucial in this, and balancing the delivery of our net zero objectives with tackling fuel poverty is important, and there are significant opportunities to address these in tandem. Through the investment we're making, we can reduce poor energy efficiency as a driver of the fuel poverty that the member describes. Funding offered through our schemes provides additional funding for households in rural areas in recognition of the additional higher costs faced. And last year, we amended planning rights, for instance, to allow solar panels to be installed on properties in conservation areas without the need for a planning application subject to specific restrictions.
Supplementary, Maurice Golden.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Zonal pricing will discourage investment in net zero in Scotland, but will lower Scottish consumer bills. Does the Minister support zonal pricing?
Minister.
Well, it is important, and this came up at First Minister's questions, it is important that we get zonal pricing right. The current GB wholesale electricity market is not fit for the delivery of our net zero ambitions, and I would recognise, the Government has recognised, the trade-offs, the complexities that exist around the debate on zonal pricing. And we do continue to have a conversation with the UK Government to ensure that the voices of industry, the voices of community are heard in that debate. Any reforms, any policy interventions from the UK Government must reduce costs for Scottish consumers and businesses while protecting investment.
And supplementary, Paul Sweeney.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. For too many of my constituents, poor quality housing remains a norm, and the lack of proper insulation can lead to damp and mould, causing problems for health, as well as leading to higher energy bills and greater emissions. The problem is only going to get worse as rainfall increases and temperature extremes become more common due to climate change. So can the Minister give their assurance that they will act swiftly to support those living in poor quality housing and capture pockets of excellence, such as the work being done by local home retrofit co-op in Glasgow, to ensure we actually level that up and becomes a norm for the nation rather than just being an exception?
Minister.
Well, I would recognise the work being done by the community organisations that the member mentions, and also, likewise, recognise the issue that he points to, which is that climate change will ultimately make these problems more complicated to be solved in the future. There are a number of areas of support provided by the Scottish Government to try and address some of these things. I mentioned the £300 million investment, but more specifically, for instance, we are seeking to ensure that private rented sector landlords are in a position to make life better for their tenants, and also to support the social housing rented sector.
Question number 4, Pam Gozo.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what its position is on whether its 2045 net zero target is still credible.
Cabinet Secretary Gillian Martin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. We remain fully committed to meeting the target of net zero emissions by 2045 that every party in this chamber voted for and is now enshrined in law. This month we will receive carbon budget advice from our independent advisers, the Climate Change Committee, which will advise a pathway to net zero by 2045. And thanks to the action of this government, Scotland is already halfway to net zero, and we continue to decarbonise faster than the UK average.
Pam Gozo.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response. With the SNP Scottish Government ditching so many climate targets, let's be honest, it looks highly unlikely Scotland will achieve net zero by 2045. Instead of setting ambitious targets with no plans on how to achieve them, will the Cabinet Secretary be honest with the public that the Scottish Government will deliver a sensible and affordable transition which will not come at the cost of jobs or through rising bills for households and businesses?
Cabinet Secretary.
So what's not credible is parties voting for targets and then turning their backs when the action is brought forward to meet these targets. We've had subsequent climate change plans in place that have got a credible pathway to 2045. We're actually working on our next climate change plan, will be as a result of the new carbon budgeting system, which is what the UK and indeed the Welsh Government work to as well. And what's also not credible is suggesting that drive to net zero is actually going to be a negative thing. It's a massive economic opportunity for the people of Scotland. We have got so many opportunities in Scotland to grasp the opportunities, particularly in the technologies and the natural resources we have, that will get us to 2045.
And supplementary, Sarah Boyack.
Cabinet Secretary, we do know our constituents are already being impacted by extreme weather, such as forest fires and flooding. So will the Scottish Government accept it does need to up its game to support people and businesses to decarbonise, given the Royal Scottish Geographical Society report, which highlights that climate change is already costing Scotland billions each year, and if left unchecked, those costs could rise to 5 to 20% of GDP, which is £11 to £45 billion a year by 2050. So don't we need that action now that the Cabinet Secretary's talked about not dumping our targets?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, until the last phrase there's no one's dumping any targets. We're committed to 2045. I was actually, 99% in agreement with everything that Sarah Boyack said, because she points to the thing that I think there's actually a danger at the moment in the discourse around net zero, is there are people, including the representatives of the Conservative parties down in the Westminster Parliament, all of a sudden changing their tack on actually whether or not we should be actually trying to get to net zero. But Sarah Boyack rightly points out, we're already seeing the impacts of climate change in our communities in Scotland. This is not something that's just happening in the global south. This is not something that's going to happen in the future. This is something that's happening now. We have had wildfire warnings. We've got water scarcity in Scotland over the summer periods, and indeed we have extreme weather events as well. So it's incumbent on all of us to look at all the actions that we can take, and as a Parliament recognise that we did all vote for the 2045 target, but we now have to all work together to vote for the actions that will get us there.
Question number 5, Fergus Ewing.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what discussions the Net Zero Secretary has had with ministerial colleagues regarding the potential impact on Scotland of the Rosebank and Jackdaw oil and gas developments not proceeding, including on jobs, GDP, tax revenue and funding for public services from the UK Government.
Cabinet Secretary Gillian Martin.
Well, what we are all clear on across government is our support for a just transition for Scotland's oil and gas sector, recognising the maturity of the North Sea Basin. And at the heart of our approach is ensuring that transition for Scotland's valued and highly skilled oil and gas workforces to a net zero future. As the member will be aware, offshore oil and gas licensing and consenting and the associated fiscal regime are all matters that are currently reserved to the UK Government.
Fergus Ewing.
Well, this doesn't really get to the heart of what I'm asking. The risk is that the Scottish funding may reduce by several £100 million if Rosebank and Jackdaw are not consented. And the reason is very simple. Those companies have invested around £2,000 million because they've obtained the consents necessary, they've complied with all the regulations, and now they find that the process is being changed mid-case, and the goalposts may be moved. If that happens, there will be a fiduciary duty on the directors of all the companies to recover their losses, which will amount to the money to be paid out, £2 billion plus loss of profits. Now, Cabinet Secretary, if that happens, isn't the Scottish Government worried that it is inevitable, whether through Barnettisation or otherwise, that the Scottish taxpayer will pay a heavy price? And therefore, should we not support Rosebank and Jackdaw to avoid those catastrophic consequences and gain the enormous advantages from the economy that the projects will deliver?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, Fergus Ewing rightly points out that a lot of the regulatory challenges and indeed the court cases are to the UK Government because they have got responsibility for this. But what the Scottish Government did is effectively our stance on future licensing warned that they had to be robust in how they actually assess the licences with regard to climate compatibility, because if they didn't, then they would be opening themselves up to criticism. And indeed, in this case, of course, we've seen quite a few cases now where there has been court action. We continue to call on the UK Government to approach decisions on offshore oil and gas in a rigorously evidence-led, case-by-case basis based on climate compatibility that is robust and domestic energy security as key considerations. But of course, recent court judgments means that specific projects referred to by the member are subject to further consenting decisions from UK ministers, and that will be based on enhanced environmental assessments of their climate impacts. It would have probably been a good idea to have been listening to the SNP government around this in order to make sure that there is a robust processes in place. And if everyone knows the playing field that's out there, then we can react to that as it's set out.
Supplementary, Liam Kerr.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The draft energy strategy, with its disastrous presumption against oil and gas developments proceeding, was released more than 2 years ago. Last year, Aberdeen lost around 18,000 jobs, due in part to the uncertainty created. And this year, we've seen BP, Apache, Hunting and Chevron announce further job losses. Minister, a straight question, so a straight answer, please. When will the finalised energy strategy be published, and will the presumption be removed?
Cabinet Secretary.
I have, I think, answered this question from Liam Kerr and other Rees colleagues for quite some time. I am still working on the energy strategy in light of some of the developments that have taken place over the last year. Some of the things that have been referred to, particularly by Fergus Ewing and some other court decisions, has meant that we have to have another look at our energy strategy in light of some of the developments.
And supplementary from Beatrice Wishart, who's joining us remotely. Ms Wishart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Gas from the Rosebank development will be exported through the West of Shetland pipeline system to Sullom Voe, ultimately ending up in the UK grid and contributing to the nation's energy security. Does the Cabinet Secretary recognise the importance of Rosebank to my constituency? And does she agree that this will be important for jobs in Shetland, where there are skilled workers and knowledge gained from decades of working in North Sea energy developments?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, no one has to remind me as a north-easter at the heart of the oil and gas industry for many decades in Scotland of the importance of oil and gas workers, not just in terms of actually managing what has been an industry that has served us very well in Scotland and the whole of the UK, and indeed I recognise in Shetland it has had a very significant footprint. Those skills associated with oil and gas are so transferable that we will have energy workers who will be working between all the developments in terms of the energy mix that comes on stream. Shetland is home to many renewable energy projects as well, for which that workforce is ideally suited.
Question number 6, Neil Bibby.
To ask the Scottish Government when it last met CMAL and what issues were discussed.
Cabinet Secretary Fiona Hislop.
The Scottish Government continues to meet with CMAL on a regular basis. The most recent meeting was held on the 24th of April, where I discussed our strategic investment, including the delivery of the 4 new Isla-class vessels, the small vessel replacement programme procurement and other live ports projects.
Neil Bibby.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. GMB Scotland have been clear that future work for Fergus Marine Shipyard is vital for its future. Yet recently we have seen the offshoring of Scottish Government contracts to Poland, despite the Port Glasgow Yard having a strong track record on delivering smaller vessels. Now they've lost out on the Western Ferries contract too. The workforce shouldn't have to pay for the SNP's incompetence. In fact, it's the Government's job to clear up the mess the Government has presided over. So what is the Scottish Government's plan to secure future work for the Yard? And why do the Scottish Government and CMAL not insert minimum social value weighting into their ferry contracts like in other parts of the UK?
Cabinet Secretary.
So the principles of what are referred to by the UK Government as social value are already embedded in Scotland. The Scottish Government has been increasing the scope of public procurement for 2 decades, and we have complementary policies and legislation that encourage local business participation, growth and development, securing opportunities in investment in jobs, skills, etc. And we operate under the Procurement Reform Scotland Act 2014. 2014. The member is fully aware that direct award of public contracts is only possible in strictly limited circumstances under public procurement rules. Shipbuilding is a competitive global market and a designated sensitive sector under the UK Subsidy Control Act. Any direct award of a public contract must comply with the Subsidy Control Act and must be capable of withstanding legal challenge. So unless the member is suggesting that the UK Government is about to abandon the UK Subsidy Control Act, he knows there are limits to what we can currently do.
Supplementary, Kenneth Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can the Cabinet Secretary confirm that CMAL is working hard to ensure Ardrossan Harbour is purchased at a fair price for the Scottish taxpayer, while being proactive in engaging with community organisations like Save Ardrossan Harbour and Arran for Ardrossan Harbour? And we should also confirm that the 49.2% increase, a whopping £78.2 million in the ferry services capital budget delivered by this Government this year, which Labour didn't vote for, purchase and redevelopment of Ardrossan Harbour would not be possible.
Cabinet Secretary.
So not only are we investing in vessels, we're also investing in our ports and harbours across Scotland. A key one is Ardrossan, and in terms of the negotiations that are ongoing, I'm pleased that Mr Gibson, in my meeting with him and colleagues Alistair Allen and Jenny Minto in their constituency capacity last week, were able to understand and represent the strong views of their constituents, but also recognise that those negotiations, particularly in Ardrossan, are at a key stage. And in terms of ensuring then that we can invest in that, there is provision and support not only to purchase that, but to have some of the initial work that will be done immediately in relation to Ardrossan Harbour. It is deeply disappointing, having secured that additional funding for our ports and harbours, that the Labour Party of all didn't vote to support that investment in our ferries and our ports and our harbours.
Supplementary, Sue Webber.
Thanks, Presiding Officer. Key vessels that are currently owned by CMAL, such as the MV Isle of Mull, are currently operating with passenger restrictions after failing a safety check. And while it's expected the MV Isle of Mull will return to full capacity next month, how is the Cabinet Secretary working with CMAL to ensure that all vessels in operation pass these safety requirements?
Cabinet Secretary.
Perhaps I'll take the opportunity to ask CalMac to provide the member with CalMac, who are responsible for the safety aspects of the current vessels and how they're operating. But she references Isle of Mull, and I met with the South Uist community, and indeed certainly 4 and possibly now 5 of the asks that they had to help support them through that difficult time will happen. But I will ask CalMac to provide the member with a briefing as to the issues around maintenance, and particularly when there are incidences happen where they have to then obviously try and get the vessels into dry dock for repair.
And I can take a supplementary from Paul Sweeney if he is very brief.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. The Minister mentions that shipbuilding is competitive, but other countries do use their state investment banks to provide credit guarantees. Spain provides a tax leasing arrangement. That's why we're not winning this business. Will the Minister look at these other countries and compete properly on the same basis?
Cabinet Secretary.
I certainly will, and with the powers of independence, I would love to have the same powers and capabilities as other countries to do exactly what the member says.
Question number 7, Colette Stephenson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what estimate is made of the number of road accidents involving deer in the Central Belt, including around the East Kilbride constituency in the last 5 years.
Cabinet Secretary Fiona Hislop.
The Scottish Government does not currently have the data related to road traffic accidents involving deer specifically within the Central Belt or for the requested 5-year period. Transport Scotland is aware from Police Scotland records that there were 11 accidents involving deer in 2024 recorded across all roads in Scotland where personal injury was sustained.
Colette Stephenson.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response. Estimates suggest the deer population in Scotland has doubled in the past 35 years. As well as road accidents, deer negatively affect biodiversity, so there is a need for more deer management to avoid collisions and protect the environment. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary if she agrees with me that increased deer management is required, and will she meet with my constituent David Worrell and me to discuss the Scottish Gamekeepers Association proposal for more pilot projects to expand this capacity while reducing road accidents in South Lanarkshire and the East End of Glasgow?
Cabinet Secretary.
So I agree with the member about the points about ensuring there is support and incentivisation for deer management. Transport Scotland is working in partnership with Nature Scot and the trunk road operating companies to better manage the issues related to deer and road users, both to improve road safety and to protect the welfare of the deer. And I will ask the appropriate officials to meet with the members' constituents, as they will be better placed to explain some of the challenges that they're facing and indeed how that might be managed.
A very brief supplementary, John Mason.
Thank you very much. I accept that food management and so on is not part of the Minister's remit, the Cabinet Secretary's remit, but can she assure us that there will be cross-government thinking and approach to this issue of deer, which is both a traffic issue and a food issue?
Cabinet Secretary. So I'm very pleased to point out that my ministerial colleague Jim Fraley has responsibility for both agriculture and connectivity. So I can assure him that cross-government work across different areas takes place across a number of areas, but clearly on this. And it's a very serious matter. And anybody that's been involved in an accident with a deer will know that. And I think, obviously, with the increased number of deers, there's continuous vigilance about this issue.
And question number 8, Hamza Youssef, who's joining us remotely. Mr Youssef.
To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on what action it is taking to help tackle climate debt in the Global South.
Cabinet Secretary Gillian Martin.
Thank you. Growing unsustainable debt puts pressure on countries in the Global South, diverting resources away from investment in climate action and from broader public services. And the Scottish Government recognises the need for good quality, genuinely affordable climate finance. And we have consistently advocated for other countries to follow our example of giving funding for loss and damage as grants, not loans. This means that countries in the Global South can recover from extreme climate events without taking on additional debt and are in control of how it's spent most effectively. We will continue to champion this, including at forthcoming international events.
Hamza Youssef.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for her comprehensive response. And on the point of the Loss and Damage Fund, that is a great example of how Scotland has shown global solidarity with the Global South, given the Global South shoulder the heaviest impacts of climate change. And the Cabinet Secretary may be aware of the Scottish Catholic International Aid Fund, SCIAF's call for debt cancellation, a new debt framework and a debt justice law, so some of the poorest countries in the world can spend their money on making their countries more climate resilient, not on debt payments to wealthy creditors. While I appreciate the direct responsibility for this matter may be with other ministerial colleagues, I wonder if the Cabinet Secretary can commend SCIAF for their excellent Cancel Debt, Choose Hope campaign, and will she ensure that the Scottish Government does meet with SCIAF and explore what actions Scotland can take to ensure that debt does not continue to cripple the world's poorest?
Sorry, Cabinet Secretary.
I thank Mr Youssef for that question, and we recognise the huge pressure that escalating debt levels are putting on countries in the Global South, particularly when compounded with them dealing with the impacts of the climate crisis. There has to be a fair, effective and long-term resolution to the global debt crisis so that resources can be freed up to invest in health, education, climate action and in the economies of those countries. Scottish Government officials have had an initial meeting with SCIAF to discuss their Jubilee 2025 campaign. Look forward to meeting them again in coming weeks to explore how Scotland can best play a role. But I point to the very important role that Scotland has in terms of going to all the international events like the COPs and the various environmental coming together of countries to really use our soft power to influence other countries in having more of a sustainable approach to debt and indeed the Global South, and how we recompense them for the situation that they find themselves in as a result of climate change.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. That concludes portfolio questions on net zero and energy and transport. There will be a very brief pause before we move on to the next item of business to allow frontbench teams to change position should they so wish. Thank you.